Your dealer just put Dexron 6 in your Duramax, handed you a receipt, smiled, and told you the Allison was good for another 100,000 miles. But Allison's own fluid specification document, the one sitting on Allison Transmission's technical portal right now, calls for TES 295 or TES 668 in those exact applications. Not Dexron 6, not a generic ATF, a specific licensed friction-modified synthetic fluid that costs roughly 3 times more at the counter. And when you ask the service writer why the bottle on the shelf doesn't match the spec sheet from the company that actually built your transmission, you'll get a shrug, a smile, and a sentence that starts with, "We've always done it this way." That sentence may be costing Duramax owners torque converters. Let's set the stakes, because this isn't a form argument about brand loyalty. The Allison 1000 and 2000 series transmissions sitting behind the LB7, LLY, LBZ, LMM, LML, L5P, and the newer L5D Duramax engines are some of the most overbuilt medium-duty automatics ever bolted into a consumer pickup. They're the reason people tow 20,000 pounds without flinching. They're also wet clutch transmissions, with a torque converter lockup clutch that lives or dies by the fluid's friction characteristics. Run the wrong friction modifier package and the symptoms creep in slowly. A soft shudder under light throttle around 40 miles an hour. A clunk on the 1-2 shift when the trans is cold. A hesitation when the converter tries to lock up on the highway. Most owners chalk it up to age. Some owners report it gets worse after a fluid service, not better. And that timing isn't coincidence. Here's where it gets interesting. Allison Transmission publishes a service fluid policy. It's not a secret. It's not a leak. It's a public document available to any dealer with a login, and the relevant sections have been quoted in technical service bulletins going back over a decade. That document specifies which transmission engineering standard, the TES designation, applies to which application. For most light-duty Allison 1000s and Duramax pickups, the original factory fill was a Dexron 3 variant, then transitioned to Dexron HP in the TES 295 standard, which is the friction-modified synthetic most people know by its trade name, Transcend. Newer builds and updated service intervals now reference TES 1668, which is the backward-compatible successor that Allison rolled out for extended drain intervals and the latest converter calibrations. Dexron 6 is a GM specification. It is not an Allison specification. Those 2 sentences are the whole story. Now, technical deep dive, because if you're going to walk into a service bay and push back on a service writer, you need to know what you're actually talking about. Inside that, Allison are wet clutches, plates, frictions, and a lockup torque converter that grabs and releases hundreds of times in a normal drive. The fluid between those plates does 4 jobs at once. It transfers heat, it carries microscopic wear particles to the filter, it lubricates the planetary gear sets, and, most importantly for this conversation, it controls the friction coefficient of every clutch engagement and release. That last job is the friction modifier package. Think of friction modifiers as the chemistry that lets a clutch pack grab and release without grinding. The wrong modifier package is like a referee blowing the whistle a half-second late. On every snap, every clutch engagement either bites too early and shocks the driveline, or bites too late and slips microscopically while it builds heat. Multiply that mistimed engagement by every shift, every torque converter lockup, every coast-down event over 50,000 miles, and you have a torque converter clutch that's been ground down 1,000th of an inch at a time. But here's where it gets interesting. The shutter owners describe that low-frequency vibration that feels like running over rumble strips at 45 miles an hour with light throttle has a name. Technicians call it torque converter clutch shudder, or TCC shudder. The industry data points to fluid friction characteristics as the primary cause in the majority of cases on transmissions that aren't yet mechanically worn. The lockup clutch is trying to grab the torque converter housing, but the friction coefficient of the fluid is wrong. So instead of a clean grab, it stutters, grabs, slips dozens of times per second. You feel it in your seat, you hear it as a faint hum. And every cycle is generating heat, exactly where you don't want heat, on a friction surface that's not designed to be replaced without dropping the transmission. Pay attention to this number. A torque converter for an Allison 1000, depending on year, vendor, and whether you're going OEM, remanufactured, or aftermarket performance, runs anywhere from $900 to over $2,000 for the part alone. Labor to drop the transmission, replace the converter, refill with the correct fluid, and reset adaptive learning at a competent shop. Runs another 12 to 18 hours of book time. So you're looking at, in round numbers, anywhere from $2,000 to $4,500 to fix something that started with a fluid choice. A correct fluid service using TES 295 or TES 668 at most independent shops runs somewhere in the $250 to $450 range, depending on whether you're doing a drain and fill or a full exchange. and whether the pan gasket and internal filter need replacement. The price difference at the counter is real. The price difference downstream is dramatically larger. Wait until you hear the part about the filter. The Allison has both an internal filter, the spin-on or cartridge inside the transmission that catches the larger debris, and depending on the configuration, an external cooler line filter on some applications. The internal filter is meant to be serviced at the fluid service interval, not on some independent schedule. Skip the filter, and you're recirculating the metallic glitter from normal clutch wear back through the valve body. That glitter is fine, almost like fairy dust, but it lives in suspension and it scores the bores in the valve body over time. Some owners report harsh shifts and erratic line pressure that turn out, when the pan comes off, to be a clogged filter and a sludge of dark, almost coffee brown fluid where bright red Dexron should be. The smell, if you've ever stuck your nose near it, is unmistakable. Burnt toffee. Sweet and acrid at the same time. That's varnish, that's oxidation, and that's the fluid telling you it gave up several thousand miles ago. Most people don't know this, but the color check that the older generation of mechanics swore by, the one where you wipe the dipstick on a white paper towel and judge by tint, is not reliable on modern synthetic ATFs. TES 295 and TS 668 can still look reasonably red even when their additive package is depleted. The only honest way to know the fluid's condition is a laboratory analysis, sample drawn from the pan, sent off to a tribology lab for a few dollars per sample. They measure total acid number, viscosity at temperature, particle count, and additive levels. The owners I've seen who do this religiously catch fluid degradation a service interval before symptoms appear. The owners who don't often catch it the day the converter starts to shudder on a long highway pull. This part will make you check your last service receipt. Pull it out, right now if you have it handy. Look at the line item for the transmission service. What does it say? If it says ATF with no specification, that's a red flag. If it says Dexron 6, that's a red flag for an Allison application that calls for TES 295 or TES 668. If it says Transend, TES 295, TES 668, or the OEM approved synthetic by name, you're in the clear. If the receipt lists a quantity but no fluid specification, ask the shop to email you the exact fluid product number they used. They have it. It's in their parts system. They just don't usually print it on customer-facing receipts because customers don't usually ask. Evidence suggests, based on owner reports across multiple diesel communities, that the substitution happens often enough that it's worth verifying every service. Now let's be fair to the dealership because the conflict here isn't villainy, it's process. Here's the dealership's reasoning, told straight. GM, the parent brand, publishes service guidance for their pickups. That service guidance has, over years, included references to Dexron 6 as an approved fluid for many applications, because Dexron 6 is backward compatible with earlier Dexron specifications. Dealerships buy fluid by the drum. A drum of Dexron 6 is cheaper, moves faster, and covers more of the lot, the Tahoes, the Silverados, the Yukons, the Sierras with the gas engines, the half-tons. The service writer isn't lying when they say Dexron 6 is approved by GM. From GM's parts catalog perspective, in many cases, it is listed. The service technician isn't being malicious when they pull from the drum on the wall. They're following the same procedure they follow on every other vehicle. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is the disconnect between the GM service guidance and Allison's own engineering specification. Allison Transmission is technically a separate corporate entity from General Motors, has been since the divestiture decades ago, and Allison's engineers, the people who actually designed the clutches, the converter, the valve body, and the friction surfaces, publish a fluid policy that is the definitive specification for their hardware. When the GM service writer says Dexron 6 and the Allison spec sheet says TES 295 or TES 668, the question becomes, which document do you trust? The answer, if you care about the longevity of the transmission and not the convenience of the lube rack, is the one written by the people who built the part. Allison's specification states what the fluid must do, the friction profile it must hold, the shear stability it must maintain, the oxidation resistance it must demonstrate, and Dexron 6 by itself doesn't always meet those targets across the full service life. Let that sink in for a second. The company that engineered the transmission tells you exactly what fluid it needs. The company that sells you the truck has a parts catalog that, for cost and inventory reasons, sometimes references a different fluid. And the dealership, which represents both companies in the customer's mind, defaults to whatever flows easiest through their service bay. None of those parties is acting in bad faith. But the cumulative effect, repeated across thousands of services a week across the country, is that a non-trivial percentage of Duramax owners are running their Allisons on a fluid that doesn't fully match the engineering specification. That's not a conspiracy. That's a process failure. And the cost of that process failure lands on the owner's repair bill, not the dealership's quarterly report. Here's where it gets interesting on the interval question. Allison publishes 2 service intervals for fluid changes, and the distinction matters. Normal service, which Allison defines roughly as on-pavement driving, light to moderate loads, no extreme heat, no extended idle, calls for fluid replacement at the longer interval, often around 100,000 miles depending on the model year and the fluid type running. Severe service, which Allison defines as towing, plowing, hauling, sustained high ambient temperatures, frequent stop and go, extensive idle time, or off-pavement use, calls for fluid replacement at the 50,000-mile interval. Most Duramax owners I've spoken to operate in severe service conditions, whether they recognize it or not. If you've towed a fifth wheel even occasionally, you're severe service. If you live where summer temperatures cross 95 degrees regularly, you're closer to severe service than normal. If your truck idles for extended periods at a job site, you're severe service. The 50,000-mile interval isn't punitive. It's recognition that the fluid takes a beating under those conditions. Pay attention to this number. A fluid sample analysis from a properly running Allison. In severe service, often shows oxidation markers climbing significantly between 40 and 60,000 miles on a synthetic fill. By 80,000 miles in severe service, the additive package is frequently depleted to the point where the friction modifiers no longer hold their target friction coefficient. By the time you hit 100,000 miles of severe service operation, on a fluid rated for that interval under normal service conditions, you're effectively running the transmission on lubrication only, with no functional friction control, and the converter clutch is the first surface to feel it. The shudder shows up, the harsh shift shows up, the delayed engagement shows up, and by then, you're not preventing damage anymore, you're documenting it. So let's get to resolution, because complaint without action is just noise. Here's the conditional advice, the if-then structure. If your truck has the Allison 1000 or 2000 series transmission, and if you cannot find a TES 295 transend or TESSN 668 specification on your most recent service receipt, then your action this week is to call the shop and ask, in plain language, what fluid product number they put in your transmission. Get the answer in writing or by email. If the answer is a Dexron VI product number with no TES specification, then your next action is to consult an independent transmission specialist who works on Allison units regularly, get a fluid sample drawn from the pan, send it for analysis, and based on the report, plan a correct fluid service with TES 295 or TES 668 as appropriate for your application. The cost of the analysis is small. The cost of the correct service is moderate. The cost of waiting until the converter shudders, then ignoring it, then losing the converter clutch entirely is large. If your truck has not yet had its first transmission service, and if you bought it new or near new, then your action is to verify before the first service that the shop has the correct fluid in stock and intends to use it. Call ahead. Ask the parts counter directly. Have them quote you the fluid by name and product number. If they say they only stock Dexron 66, find a different shop or bring the correct fluid yourself if they'll install customer-supplied fluid, which many independents will. A clean first service with the correct fluid at the correct interval sets the trajectory for the next 200,000 miles. If your truck is already showing symptoms, the soft shudder, a light throttle, the clunk on a 1-2 shift cold, the hesitation on torque converter lockup at highway speed, then your action is more urgent. Don't wait for the next regular service interval. Get the fluid analyzed now. Get the pan dropped now if the analysis comes back poor. Replace the internal filter, inspect for any metallic glitter beyond the normal fine suspension, and refill with the correct specification. Some owners report that catching it at the shudder stage, before any hard parts have failed, restores normal operation after the correct fluid has cycled through the converter and valve body for a few hundred miles. Some owners report the shudder persists, which is the indication that converter clutch wear has crossed the threshold and the converter itself needs replacement. The fluid analysis will tell you which camp you're in. And there's one more action I want you to take this week, no matter where your truck currently stands. Open the glove box, find your owner's manual, and read the section on transmission fluid service. Read what it says about severe service. Compare what it says about service intervals to your actual driving pattern. Be honest with yourself about whether you're a normal service owner or a severe service owner. Industry data shows that the majority of Duramax owners operate under conditions that meet at least one severe service criterion, but most don't classify themselves that way until something fails. Pre-classifying yourself on paper this week before the next service is one of the single highest value things you can do for the transmission you've already paid for. I want to circle back to the sensory piece for a moment because the truck talks to you and most owners don't listen until it's shouting. The soft shudder under light throttle, that's the converter clutch telling you the friction is wrong. The clunk on a delayed engagement, that's the line pressure telling you the fluid is shearing thin or the additive package is gone. The faint burnt toffee smell when you pop the dipstick, that's oxidation. The red transmission fluid that's gone brown on the dipstick rag, that's not age alone, that's heat and time and a fluid that's done its job and needs to come out. The metallic glitter at the bottom of a pan when you drop it for service, a fine amount is normal. A noticeable amount is the conversation you need to have with a qualified technician. Your transmission has been telling you what it needs. The Allison specification document tells you what to feed it. The dealer service bay tells you what's convenient. Choose which voice you listen to. Seriously, pull out your last service receipt this weekend. Look at the fluid line. Look at the part number. If it doesn't say TES 295, Transin TS 668, or an Allison approved specification by name, make the phone call on Monday morning. Ask the shop for the product number in writing. If the answer doesn't match what Allison specifies for your application, take the steps we just walked through: the analysis, the consultation with an Allison experienced independent, the correct service with the correct fluid at the correct interval. If you know somebody driving a Duramax, a friend, a coworker, a family member who tows, send them this video. They probably have a receipt sitting in a glove box or a service folder that they've never thought to scrutinize, and a 5-minute review could save them a $4,000 repair bill 2 years from now. Subscribe so you don't miss the follow-up, where we get into the difference between a transmission drain and fill and a full fluid exchange, when each is appropriate for an Allison, and the specific procedure questions to ask the shop before you sign the work order. This isn't about brand loyalty or brand grievance. It's about the simple fact that the people who built your transmission published a specification, and that specification is the one that protects your truck. Verify the fluid, verify the interval, verify the receipt, drive safe.